Couldn't be any better. Just working through this little shoulder surgery that I had Monday as a result from the accident that I had a couple of weeks ago.
Well, you look great. Now, this is interesting. I don't know if the cameras are discriminating against me because I can see you, but when it comes back to me, they have to put my logo up. Anyway, well, it's great. Well, to keep you up, it's nice to see you. First of all, I'm very happy to see you. And you look just strong and healthy. So you're doing really well, right?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. They repaired the fracture on my right shoulder socket bone here in Dallas on Monday. I'll go into for the post-operation follow-up review tomorrow. So everything should be going okay, and that's really the only surgery that I have to have related to the accident. Everything else, my skin is healing very well.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm just glad. And I actually saw you were out speaking somewhere last night because someone put it on Facebook, and I love you're getting out and doing things. It's just wonderful. So, great to see you. And even though I didn't do it yet, I'm going to quick tell our listeners, you've been on the show so many times that I feel like I don't need to introduce you, but I do want to tell our listeners, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, he is currently running in the state of Texas for chair of the GOP. We have our election coming up in Texas for who's going to be the Texas chair of the Republican Party. He's running for that, but by way of brief background, he was commissioned to the ROTC at the University of Tennessee as a second lieutenant back in 1982. He has served our country in the military for 22 years, essentially. He participated in Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm. He's had all sorts of specialized training, later airborne and jump master training at Fort Benning. His first assignment was an airborne infantry company fire support team leader. He has served our country in battle, and he's also won numerous awards I want to be sure and give him credit for. I feel like sometimes we have him on so often, I just jump into our topic. So I want to tell you a few other things about what he has deservedly been awarded. He's been given the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, 3 Oak Leaf Clusters, the Army Commendation Medal, 3 Oak Leaf Clusters, 1 Valor Device Army Achievement Medal, many other awards for really a man who has dedicated his life to serving our country and comes from a military family you're about to hear in a moment. So very grateful he's here with us today. Also served the United States Congress as a Republican from Florida, and now he's here in the great state of Texas. So Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, you put up something I'd just love to have you tell our listeners about it. I think it was an Instagram video, but you were talking about the rioters in Boston, and they actually attacked, as they were rampaging through and destroying everything in sight, they actually also attacked a statues and memorials during a protest last Sunday and in Boston. And one of those was actually dedicated to African American soldiers. Can you just tell our listeners what that statue that was at least desecrated, what that meant to you?
Well, it meant the world to me. And for those of you that ever saw the movie Glory, it was about the history of the first African American soldiers to wear the uniform of the United States of America and fight for liberty and freedom here, organized unit. And that was the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, commanded by Robert Gould Shaw of Massachusetts. And it's a very touching story because the ability for me to later on in life be a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, the ability for my father to serve, my older brother to serve, my nephew to serve, my father-in-law to serve, all came because of the service and sacrifices of these men who were formerly slaves and some freed men who decided that they wanted to stand up and fight alongside America to make sure that we lived up to the promises of the Declaration of Independence. And so to have these, these thugs, these looters, these rioters go and desecrate that incredible memorial to the 54th Massachusetts there in Boston, that really struck a nerve with me. And, when you hear people talk about all this Black Lives Matter, well, then why would they go out and destroy a monument that was dedicated to the memory of the first Black men who served this country in uniform?
Absolutely. I actually will tell you that I did become aware that there was just horrific damage in that park in Boston. 16 statues and memorials damaged in protest there by the supposed Black Lives Matter, the people who allegedly care very, very much about Black lives. That's why they're out there protesting. And yet to destroy that statue or to desecrate it in any way, along with, you may have seen, Lieutenant Colonel West, you may have seen that video that was a man in, I believe it was Chicago or Minneapolis, I think Chicago, who had, it was a retired firefighter who had he saved his money and had in place, ready to roll, a sports bar and the sports bar first couldn't open because of the shutdown, the COVID-19 shutdown, and then it just was beginning to be okay to open, and then the rioters destroyed it. And the man, did you see this video of him?
Yes, I did. He lost his livelihood. And that's one of the things that, once again, when they come up with this oxymoronic name, Black Lives Matter, it is not that all Black lives matter. It is not that all lives matter. It's certain politicized lives that they can leverage for their ideological agenda. Those are the ones that matter. The lives that are lost every single day in the Black community, the preborn babies who are murdered thanks to Planned Parenthood, which is an organization that was founded by a white supremacist and a racist, they don't speak out about that. This past weekend, if I'm correct, they had 18 deaths by way of shootings in the South Side of Chicago. I have never seen Black Lives Matter come out and protest about the black on black crime that we see happening in Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, even here in Dallas, or all across the entire globe. I mean, the United States of America. So I am sick and tired of this organization that cherry picks, based upon their agenda and their political objectives. And really, Debbie, when you think about it, this country was united in seeing that video of the murder of George Floyd. The fact that you saw an officer with his knee, full weight of his knee on the carotid artery of George Floyd, who had been handcuffed. He was not trying to resist arrest, and 3 other officers standing there. We all agreed that this was wrong. We all agreed that it was murder. But then all of a sudden you interject groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, who are radical leftist groups, and then they are the ones that are the cause of the division and the divisiveness that we have seen just recently in the past weeks or so.
I actually have commented about that several times on the show, that there's no one in America who watched what happened in Minneapolis, who watched what that Officer Chauvin did to George Floyd. He obviously, as you say, wasn't resisting, wasn't trying to go anywhere, and reacted with confirmation, yeah, that looks like an appropriate police action. Everyone was outraged. And actually there were beautiful, genuine protests about conduct toward police around the country, including right here in Texas. I don't know if you noticed, up in Collin County, just north of where we are in Dallas County, there was a prayer vigil held by Collin County citizens, black, white, everybody else, who came together, and I believe in front of the Collin County courthouse, but wherever it was, large public area, and just to pray about our nation, to pray for unity, to pray for healing, to pray for the idea that we have to have a better and higher sense of justice. We want justice for George Floyd's family. We want those officers held accountable. There's a very right and noble reaction among many Americans to what happened. What we're watching Black Lives Matter do and Antifa do in the cities around this country has nothing to do with George Floyd.
No, it has absolutely nothing to do with it. It goes right back to that mantra of Rahm Emanuel when he said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so what they're doing is looking at an opportunity to push another one of their agenda points, which is to, now they say, defund the police. We've already been through the defund the ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, which tries to make sure that we have, legal citizens here on our streets in the United States of America and protects them. But now they want not to even have the rule of law and law enforcement or officers here. Look, the fact that the city council in Minneapolis, Minnesota voted to disband their police department, that should be very disconcerting to everyone, because who is going to replace them? Some leftist group that believes that they can make the decisions about what safety and security is supposed to be. And then on top of that, Debbie, you continually hear from the left that they want to undermine and erode our Second Amendment rights. Michael Bloomberg and his Every Town for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, they're already spending money here in the state of Texas to try to get gun control candidates in Congress and also in the Texas State House. So when you pull all these things together, you see a wholehearted strategic endeavor that they have used the passing, the death, the murder of George Floyd to just advance their agenda.
At Minneapolis, they had whatever, she's the chairwoman or the president of the Minneapolis City Council, being interviewed by Allison Camerata on CNN, and who Allison Camerata said to her, well, what should I do if we defund the police? What do you do when you hear someone breaking in? Someone's breaking into your apartment or your home. What do you do? And the answer, the shortened answer of the Minneapolis City Council person was something about, your question comes from a place of privilege.
Yes.
As though it's a privileged assumption that you work hard, pay taxes, and one thing is for police, but you don't have any protection.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that all of a sudden they are saying that the desire to have safety and security, one of the things that says in our preamble to our Constitution, domestic tranquility, is now an item of white privilege. I want to be able to live in a safe and secure neighborhood, and I understand that I can't carry a police officer on my hip, so I do the necessary things to make sure that I can protect myself and my family and my property. But now all of a sudden you have people that don't believe and understand that your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, your property, those are things that are supposed to be protected. And really the social contract that we have between us as individual sovereign citizens and the government is to protect us and is to make sure that we can be safe and secure and not have to worry about, the thieves and robbers and things of this nature. So what happens at the University of Minnesota when all of a sudden a co-ed is walking home and she is assaulted? Who is she going to call?
I couldn't agree more. And, actually related to that point, I thought if you live in Minneapolis and you are law abiding, but you recognize you may be a victim of crime, one thing you're going to think about is, I think I'm going to get a gun. I didn't used to be a gun person, but if the police aren't going to be here, I want to have a gun. And so gun sales will go on. And honestly, I fear that it will lead to people becoming vigilantes, just deciding, well, the police aren't here, so we're going to line up. We're protecting our street. It really introduces, when you talk about the social order, and it sounds like just a legal concept or something, but it's a practical day-to-day, how do you feel safe? How do you keep yourself safe? It will lead to people engaging in at least a creation of community packs, neighborhood packs, coming together, protect themselves, which is the breakdown of the notion of rule of law that applies to everyone.
And the social order and the social contract. If you saw just this past weekend up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where Antifa said that they were going to come into Coeur d'Alene and they were going to set it on fire, you can see the pictures of hundreds of citizens there, who came out with their weapons.
Yeah.
They made sure that they were going to protect the city of Coeur d'Alene. And so that is what you're going to see more of. And I don't think that's what we want to have. But when you allow the rule of the mob to overtake the rule of law, then this is what we descend into.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've seen the stories also about Seattle. I want to turn our attention to Seattle because Antifa has really co-opted a significant area of Seattle and said, basically, we run this place now. We're in charge. We make the rules, and they're trying to keep the police out, very much like things you and I have talked about in the past, and no-go zones in places in Europe. But the attitude of the mayor, the response of the mayor to this conduct, and literally the Antifa people are putting up barriers, physical barriers like police might use if a road was closed off, barriers to keep police out, claiming they're in charge there. And the mayor has been very gentle and tender and deferential to the Antifa people. I just want to ask you, I don't want us to get to more and more violence. I'd like to find resolution, but I don't think surrendering to it or tolerating it is the answer. But what is your thought?
Well, you cannot compromise, appease, negotiate, or acquiesce to the mob. And that's exactly what we see happening. We don't want to get to the point where we have a mobocracy here in the United States of America. And the sad thing is when you looked at the mayor of Minneapolis and his walk of shame as he left that Antifa, protest rally where they demanded that he get rid of the police. When you look at the mayor in Seattle, if we don't have elected officials that have the intestinal fortitude to stand up against what President Trump has declared a domestic terrorist organization, then, shame on them. And I think it is so important for the president at the federal level. We need to start looking at the funding for this organization. We need to start looking at the leadership of this organization, and you've got to start getting them off the streets.
Absolutely true. I noticed in this article related to Seattle situation that in addition to having blocked off this area and claiming they're in charge, they actually have signs up listing the demands they have. One of those is, of course, defund the police. An absurdity. I did actually look at some polling. It's even a massive majority of Democrats say they don't want any defunding of the police. Majority Democrats, certainly Republicans, don't want defunding of the police. So it's a politically unpopular thing. But anyway, they're demanding that. Also demanding no protesters be prosecuted for any property destruction. So does that kind of thing seem like a logical deal to make with them?
No, that's not a logical deal to make with them whatsoever. For them to force upon anyone to say that if we go in and destroy property, we should not be prosecuted for that. No, that is against the rule of law. That is against every semblance of normalcy. That is against our domestic tranquility that is in the preamble of the Constitution of the United States of America. But once again, if as long as you continue to allow this to grow and you don't cut this type of abhorrent behavior off early in its infancy, then it only gets emboldened and it only grows, it only gets stronger. And that's why we need to see leadership in this country that goes in and cleans this out. And, as we go forward into the November 2020 elections, this is going to be very hard for Democrat candidates to, either you're going to stand with a domestic terrorist organization who, I will be very honest, reminds me of the brown shirts, the SA from
Yes.
the early days of Nazi Germany. So if you're going to stand with that, or you're going to stand with the rule of law in the United States of America. So I think that you're seeing an implosion within today's Democrat Party.
I do too. I don't know if Matt was signaling me. We're a little bit jerry-rigged here. We have a question?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here, and one you may have touched on a little bit, or you touched on briefly, but Vance from Facebook asks, why can't the president launch FBI investigations of the funding for Antifa and jail them?
Well, it's not just the FBI. You have a subcommittee, a sub-agency in the Department of Treasury that deals with terrorist groups and terrorist financing here in the United States of America. And so they can very easily start conducting investigations and looking and tracing this money and start freezing accounts. And like I said, I mean, when you look at what is happening, they are going on Facebook, Twitter, all of these social media platforms, and they're using it to organize themselves and conduct rallies. And we need to talk to Mark Zuckerberg and also Jack Dorsey and these other social media moguls, these tech moguls, and say, which side are you on? Are you going to stand on the side of a domestic terrorist organization, these radicals, or are you going to stand on the side of the rule of law? Because if you stand on their side and you allow them to use those platforms to issue their orders, their plans and things of this nature, then you're going to be culpable as well, and you can have your accounts frozen.
Amen. Love that answer. Love that answer. Matt, you had another question?
Yeah, we've got another one here from Joanna on YouTube. This might be a little fun one. She says, Colonel West, which is harder, being in the military or being a Republican?
Well, you know what? The thing is, being in the military is nothing hard about either one, because I think that it's all about your principles and values. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. I took that obligation freely without any purpose of evasion or mental reservation, and I said, so help me God. And as I said, I'm third of 4 generations of combat veterans that took that oath, to include my father-in-law, who is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. My dad's buried in Marietta National Cemetery. So I find nothing difficult in being a conservative Republican, nor being a member of the greatest military that the world has ever known, that of the United States of America.
Love those answers. And I love the question. Thank you so much. This is going to be fun. And Matt, now I see you're texting me with questions. I appreciate that. Okay, so this is a great thing. We're learning how to do this question thing within the context of this live interview. I'm going to go back to Seattle one more time. I want to figure out, I mean, it's an interesting thing. These riots have been horrible. Seattle is a very left-wing city, and I mean, they're very well known to be very leftist. And yet you have people living in those cities who are realizing, wait a minute, we're so far gone that we don't have our sovereignty over a certain geographic area in the city. We don't have, who's in charge there? What rules apply? And I think this may be a really good opportunity for some people who tend to vote leftist out of sympathy or concern or sensitivity to recognize how far afield from the idea of America the left has become. What do you think about that?
You're absolutely right. And I think that there are people that are waking up in places like Seattle that find themselves behind enemy lines. And I would not be surprised if you found the exact same thing trying to find a foothold in Austin, Texas, which we know is a very far left radical city. And the mayor down there, Stephen Adler, has been placating to the left quite a bit, to include placating to another radical organization. That's the Council for American Islamic Relations. So when we start to have people that are, as they said in that first Batman movie, dancing with the devil by the pale moonlight, nothing good comes from that. And so, there's only one rule of law in the United States of America. That's our Constitution, and our states have their respective constitutions. We cannot have such a radical organization all of a sudden come up and say, we have territory here. We're running the inside of Seattle. Because, Debbie, think about it. What is any different from what they are doing in Seattle than what ISIS did? A radical organization
Yes.
all of a sudden established their quote unquote caliphate. So now we have this little radical, Antifa caliphate or territory that they're trying to establish, and they're trying to create their own laws. And as you said, just the same as you see over in Europe with a lot of those no-go zones in some of these Islamic radical controlled communities and neighborhoods, they're trying to do the same here.
Colonel West, I don't know if you heard my opening first five, but there was a letter written by an archbishop to President Trump calling basically the battles we're in, there's just good versus evil. And I was commending him because at some point you can't keep saying, it's not like debating whether a tax rate should be 6.2 or 6.4%. It is, do we have sovereignty and the rule of law and the Constitution, or are we trying to destroy that? I think those are good versus evil questions. And I love your point, and I want to reiterate for our listeners, try to think of one Democrat in Washington, D.C., a House member, a member of the Senate, any leader of the Democrat Party who is willing to stand up and say the rioting, the property destruction, the arson, the murder being committed by rioters in this country cannot be tolerated. It has nothing to do with the very sad and wrong death of George Floyd, nothing to do with that. This is simply, insurrection against America. Think of one leader, because I can't think of one on the Democrat side. And as we get close to 2020, that is going to be the top question in voters' minds. Is there a sane core left of the Democrat Party or not? What do you think there is?
No, I don't. I think that we're in an ideological civil war, and I think that it could go a little bit even worse. And when you look at Minneapolis, Minnesota, we're talking about the district up there that's represented by Ilhan Omar. And we know already that you have a very hotbed of Somali jihadism and radicalism that is happening up there as well. So it does not surprise me that this is all occurring and this is being taken advantage of in a place where Ilhan Omar is the representative. And it doesn't surprise me that even in Boston, it's sad that this is the cradle of the freedom of the United States of America, Massachusetts, but yet it's going so far to the left. And it's represented up there by Ayanna Pressley, another one of the Girl Suicide Squad members. So I think this is an important question that we need to ask ourselves in America. Do we believe in the rule of law? Do we believe in the sovereignty of the individual? Or do we believe in this new version of the brown shirts that are trying to take over our streets?
Okay, I could not agree more. And I would love to have this be a fundamental discussion. In the 2020 elections, for a long time, I've been saying immigration is going to be huge. We're going to have to decide, do we have a border? We don't have a border. It'll still be an issue. But the events of this year of 2020 in the last several months are really weeks, and then going into the fall elections, they're really going to be a primary, what's on people's minds and people's hearts, watching the destruction of their cities, watching their police, their mayors, their elected officials on the Democrat side who won't take action, who won't stand up for the rule of law. It's a real wake-up time. I think it's fabulous. Okay, one last quick question I want to ask you. So we talked earlier, and I could not agree more with you about how despicable and hurtful it was that the rioters in Boston chose to desecrate a statue, or any statue, but a statue in particular dedicated to the gentlemen who were the first Black Americans to wear a U.S. uniform to fight in the Civil War, and that was a statue memorializing those people. That was destroyed by them. But do you think in other cases, because part of what maybe a broader spectrum of the left argues is that we should be taking down statues around this country if they memorialize somebody that maybe did something wrong. We had an example right here in Dallas, where we both live. The Texas Ranger statue was removed at Dallas Love Field because of some apparent, I'm not going to deny it, I don't know the gentleman's history, but apparent history of racist conduct or actions by the gentleman who's depicted in this Texas Ranger statue. What did you think about that?
History is not there for you to like or dislike. History is there for you to learn from. And George Santayana said back in the late 1920s, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. What we see happening here in the United States of America is no different from the Taliban when they went into the Bamyan province in Afghanistan and they destroyed the Buddhist statues and temples there. It's no different from ISIS going into Palmyra, Syria, and also into Mosul and destroying all of the Christian artifacts and the history there. So what is going to happen next? I mean, they have already come out and said that Gone with the Wind has to be banned from the streaming services. What is going to be next? Books that we cannot read? I mean, a book that written by a black conservative because they don't agree with that, we should burn those books. So this is fascism. And, again, we should not be accepting this brown shirt National Socialism and this fascism here in the United States of America. This is very dangerous times. And again, I hope that we can have adults that will step up and get this situation under control.
I certainly hope so too, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. I'm so glad you could join me today. Would you tell our listeners, I know you have one website, theoldschoolpatriot.com, and you have another one related to your run for the chair of the Texas GOP. So what is the website for that?
The chairman's race for the Texas GOP is west4texas.com, west4texas.com.
Okay. Thank you for all you do, your speaking, your writing, your clear thinking, your service to America. I'm so glad you were available to join me today. Thank you so much, Alan West.
God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, folks, I tell you, if you go to that website, The Old School Patriot, you'll find things he writes. He is just this is a guy who speaks from his heart. If you watch my show very often, we have him on quite often. He's very outspoken. That one question from the listener about whether or not it's, harder to have been in the military to be a Republican. I mean, I think he gave an answer from his heart, which is, he's so committed to his principles that he doesn't see either as hard. It's if you know what you believe in, then you execute on those principles and you move your life forward, and that's what you do. So I love that answer, love that question. So that was our first adventure into questions.